guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And in today's episode, I'm just going to be, tapping in with you guys. So you guys know I'm getting ready to start my Patreon, and I'm super excited. I really should be recording this podcast for Patreon, but I just kind of wanted to, leave you guys with some really, really good content. At this point, we have a little over 200 podcast episodes, so this is great. So I'm going to be dropping the Patreon link very soon here. Just be looking out in the description box to get that. I hope you guys are doing well. I'm actually recording this on Valentine's Day, and I am surrounded by love. I feel so loved. And, for me, my journey, my testimony has been one that is full of trials and triumphs, and I am forever grateful for everything in my life, everyone that I've met in my life at this point. So much of who I am and just everything that I believe and stand on is it's coming full circle. I feel like God is truly uplifting me. And so I just wanted to come on here and uplift you guys. And I wanted to really talk about the courage to live. I grew up where there was a lot of death in my family. There were a lot of people who were dying. I mean, I remember being very young, definitely given single digits. I can't remember when, but I remember it was every year my cousins was dying, every year my mom, I'm getting picked up from school, and it's she's telling me about someone who just died, someone who just got shot, someone who just, and it was just continuous. And so I think that generationally, there was always this tremor of death, there was always this fear of death. And I think, not really being able to articulate that as a child, it then translated into, now I have this fear of living because, it's death is all around me. And I remember really, really having to work hard to overcome that fear. So much of it was really getting to the root of that, right? Being surrounded by so much of it when I was young. And then the other side of that was giving my life to Christ, and I can honestly say I've overcome that fear. And I'm very blessed because, the thing about fear is it just really holds you bound. And we know that death is inevitable. And I think whenever you spend so much of your time, worrying or being fearful about a thing, you're giving way too much power to that. God tells us He didn't give us the spirit of fear, but the spirit of a sound mind, spirit of peace, And so I think at this point in my life, it's a very beautiful thing, and I was just thinking about, I'm getting ready to write a column about being fine, right? And when I say fine, I mean being okay. I think that we live in a world today where if it's not exciting, if it's not this glitz and glam, if it's not all this extra stuff, then it's mundane, it's boring, and it's not okay. But peace is beautiful. It's stillness, right? It's the peace that surpasses all understanding. That's Christ, and so that's what He gives to us. And I think too often, we feel like we have to always be in this state of elation. And, that's kind of one of the traps of the era of enlightenment and, spirituality and meditation to an extent, because it more so preaches this elusive belief that life is about to just be this happy-go-lucky thing 24/7, and it's okay to just be okay, right? It's okay to just be fine. You don't always have to be you're not always going to feel like you're on cloud nine, and it doesn't necessarily take away from your life experience, and it doesn't necessarily take away from anything that's happening in your life today, and so I think that that's probably one of my biggest things. I think sometimes when we're constantly chasing that dopamine and that happiness, that's what we kind of end up in. I think it's not good for our mental health. I think we end up in some really tricky situations. So the courage to live is really just doing something great with the life that God has given you. It's being in a state of happiness, it's being in a state of joy and truth, and just knowing that happiness, so much of happiness is a mindset. I really do believe in journaling. As you guys know, your girl is a whole writer, author, columnist, right? So I believe in journaling. I believe in having a gratitude journal. Sometimes it's nice to kind of just sit and think and write down everything you're grateful for the day. It's very easy to forget those little things. I was even thinking about just now, last night, seeing some cardinals, and I didn't write that down in my journal, but I love the red birds. I think they're beautiful. And, that says a lot to me, because I don't see them often, especially where I live right now. It's it's kind of rare because this is not really an area in which they are often. But my point is the importance of gratitude and just kind of how that shifts your mindset so often. And, just understanding that life isn't always about these super, super high moments, and life isn't always about the low moments, right? Like, I think if you can just live in the middle of that, because life is always changing, right? We know that change is constant. So if you can just kind of find a medium, in that, and just, learn to just be grateful for everything, I think that'll really help you. And then I think as far as like having the courage to live, well, you got to understand that, if God gave you life, then you're obviously here for a reason. You have to understand that death is inevitable, and you have to be strong and know that life is loss, till we live and we lose, that's just kind of like what life is. Like, circumstances are always changing, that doesn't mean that your life is going to be full of suffering. I know sometimes giving your life to Christ can feel like long suffering. I know for me, I've definitely felt that way about my life on several occasions, but it doesn't last forever. One thing I've learned about God is God ain't no sucker. So, you give your life to Christ, you think it's going to be this happy-go-lucky thing, right? He tells us to seek the kingdom of God and everything else will be added onto you. It's not about to be easy. God is not about to just hand over blessings. If you want the Lord's blessings, it's going to cost you something. He's getting ready to, you about to go through a whole lot of trials and triumphs, but, everything that you gain internally is that one thing that you could never be taken away. And I think that's really what the Lord's blessings is, right? I think it's so funny because I feel like when we hear about certain teachings, it all really kind of comes back to the Bible. And I remember Steve Harvey was saying that. You talked about how every self-help book pretty much correlates right back to the Bible. And so, you hear the teachings of like, if you can get right within, then you can win, on the outside. You can have these external things, if you can get the internal right. And I was just thinking about how God tells us, like, his gifts, his riches and his mercy and his goodness and all of those things, right? His spirit, the Holy Spirit, all of those things are intangible, right? Those are the things that are inside of you. And so when you give your life to Christ, you go through a pruning season, and it's like he's emptying out everything that the world has given you. Sometimes your circumstances will change, sometimes you'll lose things, but everything that you gain, what he gives you is internal, and it's riches, man. I can't even say it's riches, because he literally tells us like it's so much more than riches and rubies, and it's like, it's just one of those things that it can never be taken away. It can never be taken away. And that right there will give you courage. God tells us, it's in Joshua, Moses, over and over. He's like, be of good courage, be of good courage. And I think for me, one of the things, like learning about God, staying in my word and so forth, at this point in my life, it's more so like, what is there to be afraid of? If I have God who is with me, what is there to be afraid of? It's this beautiful verse that I love. It's Proverbs 15:3, right? Proverbs 15:3. It says, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. And, just knowing that God is omnipresent, just knowing that God is a spirit, and his spirit is here and is reigning on us. Like, there's nothing to be afraid of. I think even in the midst of trials and temptations and tribulations in my life, like his hands was there. You ever be in situations how it's like, God's like, you got to leave this, or, certain people are there in a certain space and like God moves them. You know what I mean? Like, it's that internal guidance, like he's here, he's alive, and he's with us. And so I just think, it's more so moving with that spirit and not really being afraid of anything. Like, what can man do to you? What can man do to you if God is here with you? I'm not saying go and put yourself in situations. And that's the thing too. I was writing about that on my column, just how sometimes we kind of come into this era of like enlightenment and spirituality, and how it can kind of be a bit of a hoax, because, it kind of gives us this diverse lust, right? It kind of creates this ideology that we are gods, and that we are all knowing, and that we are enlightened, and that we are spiritual, and that we know what's best, right? And that we can do all these different things. And it's like, you have to understand, like, we're humans. We're human. God tells us like our hearts are deceitful, and so I just think it's one of those things where it's like, you never want to get to a space in your life where you start to feel like you are God and you know everything. And why would you want to be in that space? That's why I was telling you guys in Pastor Princess, like, what a blessing it is to have a God who will guide you. You don't have to be out here in the world figuring it all out on your own. You don't have to be out here doing it all on your own. Like, it's a blessing to serve a God like that. It's a blessing to have his spirit. It's a blessing to have his God's love, in your life. And so it's like, let his light shine through you. You don't have to be doing all these different things and tapped into all these different things just to be glowy, to be happy, to be loved, to feel whatever. You know what I mean? Because you got to understand, like, life it's just full of feelings. I mean, we're humans, we're flesh, it's experiences. We have things, we feel joy, we feel pain, we feel pleasure. What you don't want to do is even sit in a space of ungratitude, like, or being ungrateful for your feelings. Like, you want to be grateful for your feelings because that lets you know that you're alive. I think too often we either try to numb out with like toxic spirituality, which is more so like leaning towards this toxic wave of infinite happiness. God tells us he'll give us everlasting joy, right? Joy is something that's internal, right? So that again goes back to his promises. But happiness is circumstantial. Happiness is, you may not be happy right now, and that's okay. Your circumstances may not be the things that are making you happy, and that's okay. But like, just knowing that God wants to give you joy, that's internal, and that's a beautiful thing. I think too often we think that when we give up certain things for God's promises and we pick up our cross to follow Jesus, we think that, we're not about to have certain things. We think we're about to just be out here, living life in a certain way. And one thing I would definitely say is, even in the Christian community, we got to stop comparing ourselves to everybody, right? Your walk is going to be completely different. And, you have to understand, like, you need to be accountable as a Christian in your own life to where you're in your word and you're following God's plans and his path for you. You need to be in communion with God. I think too often, because we come from church backgrounds and we're spiritual babes and so forth, we don't realize that, like, when it comes to giving our lives to Christ, like, we have to mature, in our walk here. Like, every day he wakes us up, like, it's for us to mature so that we can get closer to him and that we can, complete our journeys here and head on to heaven. Like, we're not really here to be, just dibbling and dabbling and never really growing in the faith, and I truly believe that, like, if you believe in God, you love God, you're maturing in the faith, then your fruit will show, and you'll realize that, certain things I don't want to do, and I think it's always going to be one of those things where it's like, you have to be real with yourself. Like, am I pleasing God or am I pleasing the world? Do I want to be liked or am I, you know what I mean? So I think that so much of that kind of ties into that, but I think it's important to be authentic, and it's important to be who God made you to be. And if you don't know who you are, we all struggle with certain things. So just ask him to show you. Ask him, what do you need to rid? One thing I could say is that prayer is real. I think about where I am today and my heart and just who I am as a person. Everything that I am is like by the grace of God and him answering my prayers. I was someone who was really, really big on personal development. I was big on becoming a version of myself that I just didn't see, and so for me, it was like, I knew that I had to go to my maker. I had to tap in with the person who made me, my creator. And I'm very grateful. Like, I feel very refined, and I feel just very blessed to be here today. Like, I really am. Like, I woke up today, Valentine's Day, I feel so surrounded by love. I feel so surrounded by, like, his truth and his goodness and his mercy and goodness. Last season was crazy for me. I don't even know what I did for Valentine's Day last year. I don't know if I did anything for Valentine's Day last year. But for me, it was just, it's not even really the day. It's just more so like I just woke up feeling real loved, and I wanted to share that and spread that with everybody else. So I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast episode. Again, be on the lookout for my Patreon link. It will be in the bio. You guys are going to be super excited for what we have upcoming. I can't wait. I think it's going to be great. I think you guys are really going to love it. We're going to really get to tap in. I love, forming communities. I love meeting people, meeting new people. So it's going to be great. And I look forward to like sharing my testimonies and creating some really good dialogue, and it's just going to be a great space. It really is. And so be on the lookout for that. If you'd like to support, if you found this podcast insightful, definitely tap into my column, check out my book Seasons, and I'm wishing you guys the best. I really am. And I just want you guys to know that self-love is a journey. It takes intentionality. It takes a lot of prayer, because we live in a world where we're taught that we're not enough.